Hello, everyone, and welcome. Yes, my name is Arrowfyre, and welcome to another episode of All Talk No Shock, where I am joined by Russ from Toys R Us. Thanks for coming on, Russ. Say hello.
Hello, everybody. Thanks for having me.
Excellent. Russ is a very prolific YouTuber with a very handsome channel to his own credit, which we'll tie into at the end. All Talk No Shock. But as you can see behind Russ, he's also known for having a very large and extensive collection, particularly of rare Transformers that not all of us have. And that's what I want to talk about today. So, Russ, you're known for having some of these absolute real hidden gems in Transformers. And when you consider that's 40 years worth, what do you remember of finding one of your first hidden gems? That's something you came across for the first time and thought, oh, that's a bit unusual.
I suppose I've got quite a few stories with this, but a lot of it, well, the first one is definitely pure luck, 100% unadulterated luck. And that was the Bumble Jumper variant. Obviously, we all know that it's the yellow figure that is basically a mistake. That's exactly what the figure is. Now, I'm just looking around me for the guidebooks, but I think most people have seen the Mark Balamo guidebooks. And I'd had one of them probably since the early 2000s. And mainly because, again, you'll relate to this. Obviously, we're from the UK. There was this thing known as the Curse of the UK, and we didn't get a lot of figures anyway. So this guidebook was incredibly useful for me to look at that. And this is how pure fluke it was. I was buying some alternators from somebody, ended up being in London. And as I always tend to do whenever I buy anything, and sometimes it's the downfall or the curse of me. I always say, have you got anything else? And because you never know, because people just sometimes don't. I'm not saying they don't know what they've got, but they might have something that I wanted. And he didn't tell me there and then he had a Bumble Jumper. He said, well, I'm actually selling a few figures. You're welcome to come down and have a look. So that's exactly what I did. And in my mind, I was going there to buy some alternators, and that's all I was going to buy. And he did have a few other Generations things, but at the time I wasn't really buying Generations. And then lo and behold, there, pretty much, I think it was sitting on his PC, just sitting there on the top, was this Bumble Jumper figure. And I was like, are you selling that? And he was like, I hadn't thought about it. He knew what it was. He knew obviously that, that it was Bumble Jumper. And I just said, well, if you want to sell it, I'll buy that. And he said, okay. And he sold it me. And it was, I mean, we're going back 20 odd years now. So I think I probably paid about £50 for it. But even then, that's
That's
still
fair.
a really, really, for a Bumble Jumper that, as I say, so I always think, and I say to people, it doesn't hurt to ask anybody anything. So that was probably my first proper, what I would say is rare figure, to be fair, because that's still classed as quite rare, well, really rare today.
Mm. Oh yeah, you still get people nowadays. As you say, that was 50 quid back then. But you look at people nowadays, if they get the opportunity to have a Bumble Jumper in their hands, oh yeah, no, that's a grail for a lot of people because it's quite a misnomer, isn't it? It's something that I've never handled. I've seen other people with their collection sort of waving it in front of my face, and I'm like, oh yes, I'd like that as well, please. It's because it's so unique in its mistake.
Correct. Yeah, exactly that. I think that's what makes quite a few figures rare. The fact that some of them are mistakes, and exactly that. So obviously, you get the rarer figures because they're country. Obviously, they're only released in certain countries, which I think we're going to discuss in a bit. But obviously, you do get other things that are genuine mistakes, and because they're a mistake, there's not many of them because they're
Mm-hmm.
usually corrected by then. And then, as I say, I think it's just as you say, the aura of it. It's the fact that this shouldn't even be this. This shouldn't be. It
Yeah.
shouldn't have got out of the factory, which is another little thing that I think, yeah, really makes that a bit really special piece.
It does, absolutely. Now, you touched on country variants. I actually want to recall, I think, to one of your videos that you've done one time, and it was going through the plethora of Optimus Primes that you've got, G1 Optimus Primes. Brilliant video. And I remember looking at the time thinking, I didn't know there were this many different types. And you go into all the gold boxes and this and that and the other. So, worldwide variant releases. So, in your own words, then, why are there so many different variants to the best of your knowledge and the differences that are within what makes them have differences from one country to the next?
Apart from the really obvious ones of like the different language on the box, which again, there's again, as you say, a plethora of them. But there's the other crazy things that we all know, obviously, that Transformers transformed or came from Diaclone. So you've got this transition period. So some of the first releases you may have heard of. Some of this gets quite geeky talk. So there's some things where there's metal plates in the trailers, and the metal plates were in the trailers because with the Diaclone figures originally they had magnetic feet. And of course, if
Ah.
anybody who knows Diaclone figures or Diaclone toys, they were basically play sets. Hence why to us or to most people, as you were growing up, Ironhide and Ratchet were pretty awful as toys. But when you become an adult and you realise that it's basically an exosuit, no different to what Ripley's got in Aliens for a little pilot, then all of a sudden you're like, wow, this is actually really clever. So because obviously Optimus Prime was powered Convoy, etc., and Convoy in Japan, the metal plates in the trailers were so you could put all the little figures on. So some of the first releases have metal plates. You've then got some of the first releases have got light blue parts because, again, that's coming from the Diaclone color variant of the figure. The darker blue, I suppose, variants is the more common mainstream Hasbro releases that came just after all of them. So, and the funny thing is as well, with a lot of them early release figures, the smooth bumper as well, because I don't want to say they've rushed them out. They're also what's known as the term error box. So there's at least 3 errors on the box as well, which makes the figure itself worth even more. So things like misprints, things like missing borders, and yeah, all sort of things like that, to be fair.
That's so interesting. But I was thinking of it as you were explaining about Bubble Jumper as well. It's like when you find a first issue of a book and you find typos in it, and that can increase the value of a book. Why would that be no different for Transformers? As you say, it has a rare first run misprint, and that can increase the value because of its uniqueness nature.
That's it. And I think, as I say, I think a lot of people do know this, but if anybody doesn't, I'm always open to sharing exactly this, my knowledge on the figures. So you tend to find the rarer ones or the ones that are more sought after because it's basically that they all boil down to being first releases. So obviously you got TM on the boxes. So all of the first release Transformers, so pretty much everything that was pre-rub will always have a TM trademark at the end before it got its trademark. So every single figure that if you find a boxed figure with a TM will be pre-rub. So that straight away is going to be a rare figure. Of course, once afterwards they got the trademark. All Transformers boxes, including today's, they've got the little R at the end of the S on Transformers. So that's another little loophole that people can go into. And it's funny how you mentioned misprint. I've managed to acquire all 3 Seekers. So the first 3 Seekers, Starscream, Thundercracker, and Skywarp, and they've got no print on them at all. No date stamp, no nothing at all. Just completely, stamp free with all the different wings and the different stubs and stuff.
That's so interesting how you find this kind of stuff. I mean, it's going into another question. I do want to kind of stay on some of the rarer items and where to find them. But where do you find it? Where would someone go to? Is it just a case of trawling through the likes of eBay, or is there kind of auction sites for the rarer items? Where does someone track them down?
It's interesting because a lot of the time, something that's super, unless they're an actual collector and they're selling it, but I've seen numerous occasions, and sometimes, and again, I've been, well, I don't want to say a victim because it was my own fault, but again, I've increased my knowledge through things like on the internet and through. I've got some real horrible stories of things that I've sold figures and then realized, oh, exactly what I've just sold. I know for a fact that years and years back in the early 2000s that I sold a light blue parts prime, and I didn't understand why that prime sold for more. But then you look at the pictures, and I can now vividly remember the same with Mexican variants. So sometimes people genuinely don't know. And then I think just down to things like on the internet, like TF Square One, etc., things like that. And what's his name? Fred's Workshop, I think, was one of the biggest as well. The way you start to find these variants, and you can, because some people, as I say, collectors in the know, some people will be selling specific figures. You can literally type in metal plates Optimus Prime now. Obviously, you're probably not going to find one every time you search. But you can guarantee that at some point, at some time, you will find one because somebody knows what they're selling. Whereas it's obviously highly beneficial for yourself to just search G1 Optimus Prime and then sort of have a look for it yourself, to be honest, because that's the beauty of the hunt. I suppose that's the other reason I get asked this a lot. Why do you still bother? Because it's exciting to find all these things that, people to bring them to people's attention. As I say, just say, look, this is different because of X, or this is different because of that. So there's no specific, I wouldn't say there's anything specific like a dedicated like Facebook group or anything to just selling rare items. But I think there's more than enough information out there now for us as collectors, to help us identify if we've got, because I think that's the biggest thing as well. I've done a couple of videos where I'm quite known for helping, obviously, Rohan. I helped him out with his Bumblebee, funnily enough, that he thought that he brought an original Generation 1 1984. And of course he hadn't. He brought a reissue, but because of what I knew and what I was able to tell him, we swiftly got him a good refund.
Oh, good. Yeah, I remember going back to the point that you mentioned around bringing things along, because you and I were both at TF UK Con this year, or last year. This year.
Both years. Both years.
Oh, both, yeah. And
Yeah.
you brought along some really nice wares to show off, and I particularly think it's behind you, Brave Maximus or Grand Maximus.
Grand is Grand from
Yes.
Master Force. Yeah, there he is.
Yeah, I remember you bringing that along, and that being quite a center of attention. Some of these lovely items to bring along. You're absolutely right. The thrill of the hunt is as much the fun of it as anything else. You know, finding these grails and tracking them down, and when you finally getting it, it's really not so much as somewhat off the cuff as it sounds. It's not so much having it in your collection. It's hunting down and finally getting your hands on something that you've been after for so many years. And when you get it, it's that great euphoric feeling. It's an addiction in another sense of the word, isn't it?
Yeah, completely agree with that.
Yeah. But you got onto the point with Rohan, which is good because that's another question I want to talk about. How does someone, other than tracking you down at conventions, how does someone spot a fake? And because this is the thing, you go to eBay, it can be a lawless land. How would the untrained eye know what they're getting is a genuine article or not?
Well, first and foremost, I've got it. Again, I say this on my videos as well, but I like to direct as many people there as possible because how good the website is. It's literally www.highendtfs.com. And that is a complete web. That is a website that is dedicated. So the guys who put that together, I'd love to meet them in person and actually shake their hand because they've saved my bacon loads of times. And it's really interesting, as I say, just for a read. It's exactly that. It's got any figure that's ever been KO'd and it will pretty much tell you why it's a KO on it. So because there's some that are much more difficult to detect than others, but there's some telltale signs that they're like with the KOs of the mini bots, for example. One of the easiest telltale signs is the center punch is in the center. And in all the original mini bots, they were just slightly off center because that was just to counterbalance the figure when they were put on a peg. So that's something that people can just see something. I wanted to give you something exactly that you can just identify sort of straight away that if it's a new mini bot and you think it might be a vintage, if the center punch is in the center, then it's a definite KO straight away.
That's really interesting. This is a thing that you do have to tread carefully and not just kind of, but I suppose in your case, and that's really good to know about the website, but in your case, it is through trial and error that you found these kind of things out. And I imagine it'll be the same for other people as well.
Yeah, because they are really difficult. Like the Shockwave KO, again, I've always wanted a Shockwave figure. I mean, I've got some now, but again, back to my early days of collecting, I always wanted a Shockwave and indeed a Devastator. And to be fair, I think they were the first two that really were massively KO'd. And again, I did that, luckily enough, because of eBay, and luckily enough, because of high-end TFs. And I think the seller, I don't want to say anybody's completely unscrupulous, deliberately, but I genuinely think this particular seller was, because the pictures, the boxes and everything looked okay. But like with a KO Shockwave, it's something as simple as if it's got silver screws, and it's a KO Shockwave straight away. So if it's loose or if it's in a box, if it's got silver screws, then it's a KO straight away. Whereas the seller who was selling this particular Shockwave managed to just get every single picture so perfect that I couldn't make out the exact color of the screws. So that's something to be aware of as well. So yeah, it's a huge minefield out there. And as I say, high-end TFs is fantastic. And then there's a few other people, there's a few Facebook groups. I tend to find, the Facebook groups of the specialist ones, like I think we were going to maybe touch on them a bit later, like there's a mini bot specialist group. And I think everybody there is so kind. And again, I find this with the whole community, and I've said this loads of times in all of my videos, that the best thing about this and being out there with it is the fact that there's so many people who want to help you and will help you and guide you, etc. And as I said, I think for like really specialist things, it's good that there is these groups. As I say, I know Fred's Workshop's got his own Facebook page, etc. And as I say, there is a mini bot group as well. So yeah, as I said, the other thing as well is, don't be afraid to ask as well, because there's lots of people out there who can help.
Yeah, absolutely. I hope this is educational for everyone else as it is for me. We've only been recording for a handful of minutes and I've already learned so much more that I didn't know and think to look at. So that's really interesting, just hearing some of the trials and tribulations that you've gone through in the stages, just to for things you wouldn't screws on a shockwave. I wouldn't have considered that. So it's so
Yeah,
minor, but yet it's so significant. That's really interesting. So in your case, because you've got such an extensive collection, Transformers has been around for 40 years, and say you track down a Grail. Some of these toys are not necessarily going to be, however rare they are, they're not exactly going to be in the best of nick. So if and when you come across something, Starscream to pick a name, um, but it's not necessarily in the best condition, however rare it is, do you personally go into a sort of a sort of a looked for a repair of the figures? Do you try and restore them at all?
that's a good question. And I get asked that quite a lot because I get asked, have you got a Toy Hacks code? And I haven't got a Toy Hacks code because it's just something that I don't do. And I don't know I don't know whether it makes me sound really anal or anything, but I think, and there's nothing wrong with people Frankenstein because it's called Frankenstein, and I think that's the correct term
Yeah.
in the game. But it depends on the absolute rarity, because if it's something that that's a one of a or potentially one of a kind, and I've got like a few figures that they are beaten up, they are a bit battered, but I'm not bothered because I know that this is this is a vintage original battered up figure. I've thought about it a few times, and I know there's some people who do it, but I also think in the back of my mind that if I was to potentially find one of these really old figures and then perhaps put some newer parts on it, I think, as weird as it sounds, and I don't know what this does make me sound like, but I'd always know in the back of my head that that's not an original and that it was doctored or whatever. So for me, I don't really ever. I what I do tend to do is I do tend to upgrade my collection, and that's how I got it to where it is and got it as big as it is. And I do tend to still do that now. I'll see one. Funny enough, and doing this channel's made me realize that a lot of my figures perhaps aren't in the best condition that I thought they were, because I've got them off the shelf and I'm like, oh, it's yellow, it's not white, or you know what I mean, things like that. So what I then do is same with rare figures, is if I can see another one and it's at a reasonable price where I know that if I sold mine, then this one isn't costing me any more, or indeed it's not costing me anything, then I'll constantly do that. And I've done that for a long, long time. So I think also as well, I've changed from, I used to always buy sort of, I say that's a bit of a fib, but I think when I got to the point where I was nearly completing the collection, I tended to only buy complete ones. But in the case of some of the figures, as you said, which you pointed out behind me, it's just an impossible task, because you can pay the same amount for a Minerva head than what you would for a full complete one anyhow. So sometimes it's like, right, do I save up and bite the bullet and get it properly, or do I just get a make do for now? And again, I think it just depends on what I can afford and what's available at the time. And with a lot of the rare ones, it's exactly down to that. It's a case of, right, there's a Minerva, hasn't got the chest flap, which is my one, which I'm talking about now. However, it's quite white. It's actually got an original head and the original seat. I'm probably not going to see one like this for however many years, so it'll do for now. And then, as I say, in the meantime, because things keep going up, by the time it comes to me finding a better one, then I can move that one on. And again, that's just how you upscale, isn't it?
Yeah, I think a lot of us as collectors, we're at that stage now where you think we're, 40 years into a fandom, let's say that adult collecting of a 20-year period, to put a number on it. We're at a stage where we can recycle collections, and it's a good way to do it. One, for space, another thing for money. And as you say, you're in a position where you're much better off to buy a new one fresh than you are to try and restore. And I do take your point of the Frankensteining, because you could argue that it's the crumpled element that makes it as genuine as anything else. And you start restoring it to make it look prettier, and it might, it loses its authenticity somewhat.
Yeah, it's exactly that. I get, people, you need a bit of chrome pen on that, or you need to do this, just touch that up, etc. I'm like, well, no, because then it's not original, because I'm sure it's nice, and if you want to do that with yours, then I'm really pleased that it makes you happy. But for me, it's the same with the stickers. I'd rather have some with no stickers, or some peeling off, as bad as that sounds, than go and buy a set. Because again, it's about the hunt. It's about the tracking it down. There's no hunt in going to Toy Hacks. And there's nothing wrong with Toy Hacks. They're amazing. They do what they do for the people who want them. But for me, there's no challenge in going to the Toy Hacks website, typing in the figure, there's the labels, there they are. Whereas for me, it's much more fun to find a better one, shall we say, or find one that's got this and got that, etc.
There is a charm, isn't there, when you get an old figure and then you see the stickers peeling off, and it's like, It's like when I go through sort of my old toys from back in the day, and it looks well loved. I've got a G2 Snarl for whatever reason, and he's a floppy mess. His legs all over the place doing all that, but he's well played. He's well loved. And you see things like that when people are selling them or just showing off their collection, and you think, oh yeah, there's a charm to it. So, is there anything at the moment? I've got a couple of questions which are sort of back onto one another. Is there anything at the moment that you're, as you mentioned, the hunt that you're trying to track down yourself? Is there you're in front of your Takara collection, but is there a particular range that you're focusing on at the moment for collecting?
I think at the moment, but again, I'm not actively looking for it, and that's just because the prices at the moment are just insane. So it's the South American mini bots. Some of them are
Particularly
just,
South American.
yeah, because they're the ones that are all the wrong colors. So they're the ones
Ah,
that you and so you've got Antex, which is Argentinian. You've got Estrella or Estrella, however you want to pronounce it, which is Brazilian. Linsa, which is Peru, and of course you've got IGA, which is Mexico. And they're the ones that are just the wacky blue cliff jumpers, yellow wind chargers, all the crazy sort of figures
wow.
that it's weird because it's like Antex and Estrella were in part way licensed to make them, but they just went completely on their own tandem and just started making all these ones that they are inferior quality. So they're not KOs per se because they were released at the same time. It's a little bit like the Bumble Jumper. They didn't obviously get the proper script or whatever because, of course, I mean, you go with communications nowadays, etc. It's easier to text it or whatever. I mean, imagine the difficulty it must have been from Hasbro America getting it across and then translating it and all this
Translating.
sort of
Yeah.
stuff. And of course, the thing is as well, if you look at a lot of the old Micro Change and Micro Man figures or the Penny Racers, which of course were all the mini bots, Takara
Mm.
did have blue cliff jumpers and white bumble jumpers and all this sort of stuff. So if they've only got the Takara catalog, then what they're making is correct to them. So
Yeah.
so for them that's the minefield. And again, I discuss this quite a lot with excuse me with a lot of people. The rarity, the scarcity depends on the location. So obviously Takara figures cost more than Hasbro because Japan is smaller than the rest of the English speaking world. I know obviously populations in certain countries obviously are very different. And then funny enough, I was just obviously like Jig, which is the Italian variants. Obviously they were only made in that small country, which is Italy, again, compared to the rest of the English speaking world. So it's all sort of that. It depends on how small the area is, on the rarity. And sometimes some people aren't bothered. I think, there's a few there was at one point where the El Greco versions of minibots, nobody really wanted them. But like now again, because, it's a different variant, and all of a sudden El Greco products are now through the roof. It's crazy.
Yeah. That's so interesting hearing of things that are effectively made as mistakes or just because the factories thought that's what they were doing at the time. And now for what was considered castaway, 20, 30, 40 years ago, is now considered a hidden gem in its own right. And that's, again,
The
another
best
nugget.
the best example of that, though, is the IGA, the Mexican ones. And I know that you did want me to touch onto this. So the best thing about the Mexican is that they got so many things wrong. And the good thing is now that some of these are quite common. So we've not the figures are common, but the knowledge is common. Can't get me words out. So people have heard of Puffer, which is of
Yeah.
course which it basically literally is. And I wish I could grab it now, but I can. In fact, I might grab it in 2 seconds just to show you. It is literally just Puffer painted in Pipes colours.
Mm.
So it's again, and that's just what they thought they were doing because they didn't have Pipes molds, and because they knew that, of course, most 86 mini bots were 84 mini bots, just slightly retooled. Whereas they didn't retool them, they just took the legitimate 84 mini bots and painted them in 86 colors, like
Yeah.
Swears, which is Swerve and Gears. So it's a Gears mold, but
Right.
it's painted in Swerve's colors, and the same with Outback in the Brawn colors. And they took me ages to track down because people don't know what they are. People will think that it's Pipes, or people, they'll think it's Swerve, and then only to me or to people who know, it's like, actually that's not. That's
Yeah.
it's like, wow, that's a Puffer. Do you know what I mean? So they took quite a lot, and because again they are, and as bad as it sounds, they are so inferior quality. The Mexican figures, in every way, they used paper stickers. They messed up Trailbreaker's head. There's one called Hoistbreaker, which I'm sure you've heard of, which is it's the hoist mold but with the Trailbreaker head, but again it's green. and
Yeah.
all the things. There's a full playlist on my channel of the Mexicans, and just seeing what you would have thought at the time. You would think this is a KO because it's so bad. It's got paper stickers on it. It's got, it's got paint flaking off it, and then of course the notorious lead paint in all the products which had them all
Oh.
open before they made their way over here.
Yeah, of course. Now, you've actually got me thinking now. I wonder how many I picked up in my travels, certainly in my younger days, and not kind of noticed what
Yeah,
I had because you get. I was going through stages where it's just a transformer. I didn't mind if it was Puffer or or whoever in whoever's paint scheme. But yeah, you're right. It could easily be another world quality that's just made its way across. And the lead paint, yes, I remember that completely. Um, so I think you touched on in one of your videos recently, your collection size at the moment. Did I hear 10,000 plus?
I don't, I don't. I think that
Wrong
somebody
time to
was.
blush, Russ.
No, no. It's probably not figures. It's one of them things that I'm not proud of not knowing exactly what I've got, but somebody was talking about the fact the person who's got the Guinness World Record was because it was everything. It was memorabilia as well as figures and all that. And because obviously that I'm in a, like we've just discussed, I'm in a constant state of, for me, my collection, the core collection is G1. I very rarely sell G1 figures unless we've done exactly what I've just said, unless I find a better copy of mine and I can sell another. The only other things that I tend to really keep hold of at the moment are the Studio Series 86 and a few generations. So if you see me reviewing third party figures, then I just sell them straight on. Studio Series movie figures, I sort of sell them straight on. And I've done a lot of selling, funny enough, with your previous guest, obviously Brandon from Bayverse of Madverse. He's had so many of my movie figures. And in a way, it's great that I can then pass on to him things that I know are pure gems because I've always been on the Japanese websites and finding the things that you just can't find over here. So for me to pass them on to him has been brilliant. But exact numbers I don't know. But like I think we were talking because of the comics, I've got all the G1s, Marvels, I've got all these. This makes I hate doing things like this because I don't want to come across like I'm being big-headed. But so I've got, as I say, the entirety of Generation One. So not just the Hasbro, all the Takara, all the European exclusives. But then the stupid thing is, like you pointed out, not just one of them, like 18 Optimus Primes. just stupid, like Astro. I think Onslaught. I think Onslaught's another one. I did a video called An Onslaught of Onslaught. So for G1, I've got like a Spanish box, a French box, an English classics box, a Takara box, an 87 gig box, an 87 Hasbro box, a Bruticus gift set from Takara, a Bruticus Multiforce gift set from Jig, 4 or 5 different loose ones, and it just gets silly, and that's one character.
I mean, don't feel bashful about it whatsoever. A lot of people, Primetime Moth, will say the same. You've got a stellar collection, and you will have things that other people won't consider. So shout about it. Why wouldn't you? You know, it's there to be displayed for you to enjoy, but to be shared to the fan. I personally love looking at like backdrops of videos and seeing other people's collection and how they're displayed and what they've got, because our collections are like tastes that will be so different and varied. And so, yeah, if you've got 18 onslaughts that happen to be one of my favorite characters anyway, so you're in my good books for that, certainly.
There we
But
go.
it's so interesting to hear of the different varieties that are out there. Just talking to you today, Russ, I never considered some of these things that you need to look for and all the different worldly variants and the qualities that are in there and where you track them down, how much you can spend, and whether you stumble across them or purposely hunt them down. It's been really insightful talking to you. So really thank you for coming on. We've rattled through the questions quick, but my God, there's content there. So thank you for your time with that. So I'll quickly finish off then. The floor is over to you. Your channel, we know you at Toys R Us as you are wearing the branded t-shirt to display.
Yep.
Where can people find you? Where would what you got coming up for your social medias and your channel?
So yeah, it's Toys R Us, but it's the actual words. And the reason why I've got this topic on, because the other one, when I use, shall we say their logo, it's not allowed anymore. But yeah, you can find me on my Instagram is toys_R_us. My YouTube channel is Toys R Russ. And what else have I got? I've got a Threads as well. But yeah, with regards to the YouTube, I've just started doing a podcast because lots of people have asked me to do that. So funnily enough, it's going to probably end up doing things like exactly what we've just done. Just people are going to give me topics and I'm going to talk through them again in a way to help and assist people. But I've dug myself a hole ever since lockdown. I get a review done every single day. So if you're after content, then obviously on my channel, and it can be a complete variety of things. I think that's one of the best things that I've learned from starting at YouTube is the fact that I've had to broaden my knowledge as well with other toys. And obviously your ballpark is definitely the third party. So it's interesting for me as well to jump on and learn about third party. And as I say, I'm always happy to partake to, what's the word? To share my, I was going to say partake, that's not the right word, share my knowledge with everybody else as well. So yeah, you can find me on any of them platforms there.
Excellent. I'll put all of this in the description of the video below. But Russ, we've rampantly gone through it, but there's been really useful stuff there. Thank you for your time. Do wish you all the best with your channel. I'm sure it will continue to grow with your very rapid content that you throw out seemingly daily. But thank you very much for coming on. And thank you very much to everyone for watching. And as always, I will see you on the next one.